You've been living in a body your whole life, and somewhere along the way, someone told you that body was just a vessel, temporary, a container for something more important, that the real work happened elsewhere, in prayer, in belief, in the waiting. But what if the body wasn't separate from the spiritual signal? What if it was the signal? There's a set of ancient teachings, systematically burned, politically suppressed, officially declared dangerous, that says the divine doesn't live above you, it lives through you. And when it moves through you, it leaves marks. Not metaphorical ones, real, felt, interior ones. Shifts in how you perceive, changes in what you notice. A pattern of experiences that, once you learn to read them, point to something the institutions that shaped your worldview spent centuries trying to prevent you from knowing. Sophia is at the center of this, and her marks, 7 specific signatures she leaves in the ones she moves through, are stranger and more precise than anything I expected to find when I first went looking. If you've had experiences you couldn't explain, if you felt something pulling in a direction your inherited framework couldn't map, if you've sensed that the story you were given about who you are and where you come from is incomplete, stay with me. Because what I'm about to lay out isn't speculation. It's sourced in texts that survived fire and erasure for a reason. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. Most people, when they hear the name Sophia, picture a minor religious footnote, maybe a vague association with wisdom, the kind of word that gets stitched onto needle points and printed on inspirational mugs. That's the version that survived. That's the version that was allowed to survive. The actual Sophia, the one documented across the Nag Hammadi library, across the Pistis Sophia, across the Apocryphon of John, is something the early institutional church spent an extraordinary amount of energy trying to eradicate. Not ignore, eradicate. Irenaeus of Lyon, writing his treatise Against Heresies around 180 CE, dedicated entire sections specifically to dismantling Sophia's story. You don't write hundreds of pages against something harmless. You write hundreds of pages against something threatening. So who is she? In the Gnostic cosmological framework, Sophia is the final emanation of the pleroma, the divine fullness, the totality of light. She is, in the most precise translation the texts allow, divine wisdom in motion. But the story doesn't stay clean. According to the Apocryphon of John, Sophia acts independently. She moves without the consent of the pleroma. She generates something, a flawed creation, and in doing so, she initiates the entire catastrophe and the entire possibility of this material world. Now here's where it gets cosmically significant. The demiurge, that flawed creator god who fashioned the material world and mistook himself for the supreme being, was Sophia's unintended consequence. But the spark that animates every human being, that interior light the Gnostics called the pneuma, that trace of the divine the archons can't fully contain or control, that came from Sophia too, directly, breathed into the material body without the demiurge understanding what had just happened. That's the architecture. The demiurge builds the cage. Sophia, knowingly or unknowingly, depending on which text you're reading, places something inside the prisoner that the cage was never designed to hold. I spent 2 full evenings going through the Pistis Sophia before I understood what I was actually looking at. Because that text isn't just cosmological theory, it's a dialogue. Jesus speaking directly with Sophia, describing her fall, her repentance, her restoration. 13 prayers, specific stages, a descent and a return. And running through every page of it is the same insistence. Sophia's story isn't happening at a cosmic distance. It's the pattern of every awakened human consciousness moving through this world. That's not poetry, that's a technical claim. The texts mean it literally. So when I talk about Sophia's marks, I'm not talking about symbols or allegory. I'm talking about specific experiential signatures that the Gnostic tradition identified as evidence that the pneumatic spark, Sophia's deposit, her breath inside the material form, is active and moving. 7 of them, each one distinct, each one documented. And the reason most of you watching this have never had a framework for these experiences isn't because they're rare. It's because the framework was taken from you before you were old enough to ask for it. That's not an accident. That's architecture. The first mark Sophia leaves isn't dramatic. That's actually the point. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with vision or sound or any of the things people associate with spiritual experience. It arrives as a quiet, persistent wrongness. A sense, sometimes faint, sometimes sharp, that the account of reality you've been handed has a gap in it. Not a factual gap necessarily, something more fundamental, a structural gap, like a story told by someone who was present for most of it but left the room at the crucial moment. The Gnostic texts have a name for this, the Gospel of Truth, composed in the 2nd century and recovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, describes the condition of unawakened humanity as a kind of terrifying dream, vivid, absorbing, but ultimately incoherent. Before we continue, there's something I want to place in your hands. We've gathered the forgotten texts, the ones the Church sealed away for 17 centuries, into a single guide for those who feel the pull towards something deeper. Because whether we speak of the archons, the demiurge, or the divine spark, one truth remains. This knowledge was never meant to be lost. This is for anyone who senses there's more to this reality than we've been told, and who's ready to remember it. You'll find it in the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code right here. I'll give you a moment to do that. The text says, "People were seized by fear and confusion, as if wandering in a fog." But crucially, the Gospel of Truth frames the moment of awakening not as the arrival of new information. It frames it as recognition. The pneumatic person doesn't learn something new. They remember something that was always true about them, but had been buried under the noise of the material world. That distinction matters enormously. If awakening is just information acquisition, then theology is just a more dramatic form of trivia collection. That's not gnosis, that's just a library card. Real gnosis, as the texts consistently describe it, has a quality of recognition rather than discovery. You're not encountering a new idea, you're encountering a true account of something you have always, at some level, already known. Now here's what I noticed when I first started paying attention to the comments on this channel. People don't usually write in to say, "I just learned something interesting." They write in to say some version of, "This named something I've felt my whole life and could never explain." The language of recognition, not acquisition. One viewer left a comment that stopped me for a moment. It was on my video, "I rewatched The Matrix after reading the Nag Hammadi. I can't unsee it now." They wrote, "I've felt since I was a child that the version of reality being handed to me had been edited. I just didn't have words for it." That's the first mark. Almost exactly as the texts describe it. Not a dramatic revelation, a felt absence. A knowing that the official account has been trimmed. The Apocryphon of John calls the archonic system one of forgetfulness and ignorance. The mechanism isn't brutal suppression so much as managed unawareness. You're not imprisoned behind locked doors. You're simply surrounded by a worldview so total, so assumed, so reinforced at every cultural level that questioning it feels not just difficult, but somehow slightly absurd, until it doesn't anymore. That shift from absorbed participant to quiet, unsettled questioner is the first place Sophia's hand becomes legible. It's subtle, but it's precise. And once you've felt it, you'll recognize it in retrospect as the beginning of everything that came after. If you're watching this video, there's a significant probability you know exactly what I'm describing. Not as a philosophical concept, as a lived texture. A feeling you've carried so long it almost feels like personality rather than perception. It isn't personality, it's a mark. And the texts say it means something specific about what's moving inside you. The second mark is harder to talk about without sounding like you're describing pathology, but stay with me because the Gnostic tradition handles this with a precision that clinical language entirely misses. There is a type of person, and I suspect a significant portion of the people watching this are that type, for whom the interior life has always carried a quality of reality that the exterior world somehow doesn't match. Not daydreaming, not dissociation, something more specific than either of those. The inner world feels more textured, more vivid, more continuous, more fundamentally true than the world of schedules and surfaces and social agreements that everyone around them seems to navigate without friction. I want to be careful here because this can be misread as introversion or sensitivity, which are real things but not what I'm pointing at. What the Gnostics were describing was ontological, not temperamental. It wasn't that some people are just more reflective by nature. It was that the pneumatic spark, Sophia's breath inside the material form, creates a kind of ongoing interior signal that the person can't not be aware of. It persists. It doesn't fade when life gets busy. It doesn't go quiet when external demands pile up. It is simply there, underneath everything else, like a frequency you were born already tuned to. The Gospel of Philip, another text recovered from the Nag Hammadi library, makes a distinction I think about frequently. It separates those who receive truth as information from those who receive it as experience. The text says, roughly, that the one who receives truth must be born again, not in the ceremonial sense, but in the sense of a genuine interior reorganization, a restructuring of what feels real. That restructuring, Philip suggests, isn't something that happens to you once. It's the ongoing condition of the pneumatic person in this world. You are perpetually in a state of interior motion, while the exterior world insists on its own solidity. I'll tell you when I first understood this distinction in a way that wasn't just intellectual. I was reading the Trimorphic Protanoia. That's a 1st or 2nd century Scythian Gnostic text. And if you haven't encountered it yet, it is genuinely astonishing. And I hit a passage where Sophia's voice speaks directly in the first person. She says, in translation, "I am the voice that appeared through my thought. I am the one who is called thought, the reflection of the invisible spirit." And I had to stop. Because she wasn't describing herself as external to the reader. She was describing herself as the voice the reader already hears inside themselves. Something shifted when I read that. Not dramatically, but precisely. Like a word I'd been mispronouncing for years and had just heard spoken correctly for the first time. The second mark is that interior signal, that ongoing frequency. The sense that your inner life is not decoration or escape, but a more direct encounter with something real than almost anything the external world offers. The texts say this isn't imagined. They say it's evidence of what you carry. Sophia's breath doesn't go silent in a body it has animated. It persists. And the person who feels it, who has always felt it, who can't turn it off even when they want to, isn't broken or oversensitive or spiritually confused. They're carrying something. And the texture of that carrying is the second mark. The third mark is the one nobody talks about because it sounds like a complaint. It's the persistent, low-grade sense that the rules everyone else seems to follow without question, social rules, institutional rules, the unspoken agreements about what matters and what doesn't, feel slightly wrong to you. Not wrong like you've analyzed them and found logical flaws. Wrong like they're made for a different species. Like you're wearing a coat cut for someone else's shoulders. You've probably been told this is arrogance, that it's immaturity, that one day you'll grow into the rules and stop chafing against them. Maybe you believed that for a while. Maybe you spent years trying to sand down the edges of yourself that didn't fit. But here's what the Gnostic tradition says about that specific friction. The texts, and I mean texts plural, because this isn't a single document making a single claim, this is a consistent thread across the Apocryphon of John, the hypostasis of the archons, the Gospel of Philip, describe the archons as the architects of a particular kind of order, an order that is functional, internally consistent, and specifically designed to produce compliance. The demiurge, the blind creator of material reality in Gnostic cosmology, doesn't build a world that works for pneumatics, the spark bearers, because he isn't building for pneumatics. He's building for his own logic, his own hierarchy, his own need for things to stay arranged the way he arranged them. And when something inside you keeps saying this arrangement is wrong, that friction isn't dysfunction. That's the pneuma. That's Sophia's mark. Now, I want to be careful here because this can slide into a flattering self-justification for any kind of bad behavior. I don't follow rules because I'm spiritually superior. That's not what the texts describe. The mark isn't entitlement. The mark is something more precise. It's the inability to locate your final allegiance inside the system. You can operate within structures. You can function, cooperate, participate, but there's a center of you that doesn't belong to any of it, and you've always known that, even when you couldn't name it. That's the third mark. The fourth mark is harder to describe, and honestly, it's the one I sat with the longest before I felt I understood it well enough to talk about it. I spent a significant amount of time, weeks, not hours, working through the passages in Pistis Sophia that describe what happens to the soul that carries a genuine divine spark when it encounters certain ideas or teachings. The text describes something almost physical, a kind of recognition that goes below cognition, where the soul doesn't decide that something is true and then feel convinced. The soul feels the truth of it first, and then the mind catches up. You've had this. I know you've had this because it's the reason you're here, watching a video about marks left by a figure from ancient Gnostic cosmology instead of doing something more conventional with your afternoon. Something resonated before you understood it. You encountered a concept. Maybe it was the first time you heard the word archon used seriously. Maybe it was a passage from the Nag Hammadi texts. Maybe it was something someone said offhand that hit with completely disproportionate weight. And your reaction wasn't intellectual evaluation. It was recognition. Like remembering something you'd been told you never knew. The Valentinian tradition, and Valentinus, who came extraordinarily close to becoming a central figure in what we'd later call Orthodox Christianity, was one of the most rigorous theological minds of the 2nd century. Describes this precognitive recognition as the pneuma responding to its origin. The spark recognizing the fire it came from. It doesn't reason its way to that recognition. It can't, because the demiurge built rationality to serve his system, not to lead pneumatics back to the pleroma. The recognition bypasses the architecture. So the fourth mark is this. You are moved by things you don't yet understand. Deeply, genuinely moved. And the movement is not emotional in the sentimental sense. It's more like tectonic, interior, foundational. Something below the feeling responds before the feeling arrives. That's Sophia's fourth mark. And if you felt it, you already know exactly what I'm describing, because there's no good secular language for it. The experience is real. The language to contain it just isn't in the vocabulary most of us were handed. The fifth mark shows up in your relationship to suffering. Not how much you suffer, everyone suffers, but the texture of how you relate to it, what it does to you versus what it does in you. The Gnostic tradition doesn't have a comforting account of suffering. I want to be direct about that. There's no prosperity theology here, no cosmic guarantee that pain has been scheduled to resolve by a particular date. What the texts do offer is a different ontological frame for what suffering is and what it means for the one carrying the pneuma. The Apocryphon of John describes the archons as having a particular investment in keeping divine sparks trapped in cycles of material distress. This isn't metaphor dressed up as theology. The text is specific. The archons use forgetfulness, use the weight of material existence, use the noise of bodily need and social anxiety to keep the pneuma from waking to what it is. Suffering in this frame is largely the signal of that entrapment. It's the static that plays when the tuner is off frequency. But here's what I noticed, and this is what I personally think is the most underrated part of the entire Gnostic account of human experience. The The pneumatics in these texts don't respond to suffering the way the archons design them to. The expected response, the designed response, is despair that drives deeper compliance, more allegiance to the material world, more desperate attachment to what the demiurge has built, because when you're suffering, you tend to reach for what's immediately available. But the pneumatic tends to do something different. The suffering turns inward, not into depression, though it can visit depression, inward toward inquiry, toward the question underneath the pain rather than just the pain. The fifth mark is that your suffering has always had a question inside it. Not when does this end, but what is this telling me about what is real? Before we continue, some of what I've learned simply never makes it onto YouTube. That's why I started the Gnostic newsletter, a free newsletter where I go deeper into esoteric Gnostic teachings, hidden wisdom, and the mysteries we don't share in these videos. And when you sign up, you'll receive a Gnostic guide to mastering reality as a welcome gift, completely free. You'll find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a moment to do that. That inward turn is the pneuma refusing to be fully convinced by the architecture of the demiurge. It keeps looking past the surface of the experience for something beneath. I remember a specific period in my life. I don't need to describe the circumstances in detail because the circumstances aren't the point, where I was in genuine and sustained difficulty. And what I noticed even then, even inside it, was that I couldn't stop treating the difficulty as a philosophical problem. Not to avoid feeling it, I felt it fully, but there was always this simultaneous movement toward the question behind it. What is this showing me? What have I been assuming that this breaks open? That wasn't a coping strategy. I didn't choose it. It was simply how the experience arrived. I didn't have the vocabulary of pneuma or Sophia or archons at that time. But when I later encountered those texts, I recognized my own experience inside them. And that recognition, that specific form of it, is what I'm pointing to as the fifth mark. The sixth mark is loneliness of a particular kind. Not social loneliness, though it sometimes comes with that, a deeper loneliness. The sense that the interior life you actually live, not the version you describe at dinner tables, but the actual texture of how consciousness feels from the inside, is genuinely untranslatable to most of the people around you. You've tried. Most people carrying this mark have tried. You've reached for the words and watched them land wrong. You've described something that felt enormous and watched it be received as quaint or eccentric or vaguely concerning. And eventually you learned a kind of dual existence. The version of yourself that participates in normal social exchange and the version that moves through an entirely different interior landscape that you've largely stopped trying to explain. The Gnostic texts describe the pneumatic community as rare and scattered. This isn't elitism. The texts don't frame it as something to be proud of. It's more like a geographical fact. The people who carry the spark are not clustered together in obvious communities. They are distributed through the material world, often isolated, often speaking in approximations to people who are listening with entirely different inner ears. And the loneliness this produces isn't a character flaw. It's a structural consequence of carrying something that the surrounding architecture wasn't built to accommodate. One viewer, someone who commented on my video about spending 30 days living exactly how the archons want, wrote something that stopped me mid-scroll. They said that for most of their life they had assumed they were the problem, that the gap between their interior experience and everyone else's was evidence of some failure on their part, some deficiency in the ability to connect. And I understood that completely, because the sixth mark has been misread that way by almost everyone who carries it. The loneliness feels like evidence of brokenness because that's how isolation feels. But in the Gnostic frame, it's something else. It's the signal of a consciousness that is operating on a different frequency than the one the archons installed. That frequency can't always be shared, but it can be recognized, especially by others who are running on the same signal. The seventh mark is the one that closes the circuit. I'm going to describe it carefully because it's the most easily dismissed and also, I think, the most important. It's the sense, persistent, recurring, impossible to fully argue yourself out of, that you are supposed to understand something. Not just that the world is interesting and knowledge is rewarding, something more specific than that, a directional sense. Like there is a particular order of understanding that you are moving toward, and that the things you've been drawn to study, the traditions that have called to you, the ideas that have arrived with disproportionate weight, they are not random. They are sequential. They are part of a path that is taking you somewhere, even when you can't see the destination. The Pistis Sophia, and this text is extraordinary. I've referenced it in previous videos, but never quite in this context. Describes the soul that carries the divine spark as having a hymarmene, a destiny, but not in the fatalistic sense that word usually implies. Not a fixed script you're following, more like a vector, a directional pull. Something is drawing you toward a particular kind of knowing, and that pull is not external. It doesn't come from a teacher or a tradition or a set of doctrines. It comes from inside, from the pneuma itself, which remembers what it came from even when the conscious mind has forgotten. Here's where it gets cosmically significant. If you feel that pull, and I suspect the majority of you watching this do, because that pull is part of what directed you here, then what you are feeling is not ambition or curiosity or spiritual vanity. What you are feeling, in the Gnostic account, is the pneuma orienting toward the pleroma, the divine fullness from which it fell, the light that Sophia carried when she moved beyond her boundary and initiated the crisis that produced material existence. The spark is trying to find its way home. And the seventh mark is that you can feel the direction, not the whole path, not the destination in clear daylight, but the direction, and you've always been able to feel it. Now, I want to be honest about what all 7 of these marks together mean, or more precisely, what they don't mean. They don't mean you are better than other people. The Gnostic texts are sometimes read that way, and I'm Daniel, this is Gnostic Talk, and part of what this channel exists to do is correct that misreading directly. The Gnostic tradition that emerges from the Nag Hammadi library, from the Valentinian schools, from the Sethian texts, does not describe pneumatics as morally superior beings deserving of admiration. It describes them as sparks in a difficult situation. Beings of light who have fallen into a material architecture specifically designed to make them forget what they are. There is nothing triumphant about that. There is something significant about it, but significant and triumphant are not the same thing. Carrying Sophia's marks doesn't grant you answers. It grants you the question. The perpetual, driving, interior question about what is real and what you actually are, and where the light inside you came from and where it is trying to go. That question is a gift. It is also a weight. Most people carrying these marks know both of those things simultaneously. And here's what I want to say directly to anyone who has been counting these marks and recognizing themselves in each one, and feeling something between relief and vertigo at being named. The naming matters. I've talked about this across several videos now, most recently in my exploration of what happens when you actually call the monad every night for a year, and the consistent thing that comes back from viewers, the comment thread that never stops, is the experience of being named, of having a framework arrive that doesn't just explain an intellectual idea, but explains you, your specific texture, your specific way of moving through the world and through your own interior life. That experience of being named is itself one of the things Gnostic texts were written to produce. These were not academic documents. They were not written to sit in libraries and be analyzed by scholars. They were written for the pneumatic reader who would encounter them and feel recognized. The author of the Apocryphon of John wasn't writing theory. They were writing a mirror, and the face in the mirror was supposed to be yours. So if you've seen your face in these 7 marks, if the friction with the archonic order is familiar, if the precognitive recognition is familiar, if the directed loneliness and the question inside the suffering and the interior signal that never goes quiet are familiar, then you're not reading about something foreign, you're reading about yourself. And the texts have been waiting for a very long time for you to look. So here's the question that follows all of this, and it's the question I get asked most often in different forms, across different videos, from different people, but always underneath the same question. Okay, I recognize this. I've recognized myself in this. I feel what you're describing. Now what? And I want to answer that honestly, because the honest answer is less spectacular than most spiritual frameworks want to admit. You don't graduate from carrying the marks. There is no moment where the pneuma fully reassembles its memory, the archonic fog lifts entirely, and you walk around in a state of permanent illuminated clarity. That's not what the texts describe, and I'd be doing you a disservice to suggest otherwise. What the texts describe is something more like an ongoing process of less forgetting, a gradual increase in the signal-to-noise ratio. The static doesn't disappear overnight, but you get better at hearing through it. The Gnostic traditions, and I want to be specific here because the Gnostic tradition is actually a collection of distinct schools with distinct practices, not a monolithic system, offer different specific responses to the question of what a pneumatic does once they recognize their nature. The Valentinians developed a rich sacramental framework built around that recognition. The Sethians engaged in specific contemplative practices designed to move awareness through the archonic layers toward the pleroma. What these different schools share is the orientation. The work begins at recognition, not at belief. This is a distinction the style of thinking most of us inherited completely misses. The inherited model, across most forms of Western religion, is that belief is the work. You accept the right propositions, you perform the right rituals, you belong to the right community, and the spiritual outcome follows. The Gnostic model inverts this at the foundation. Belief is not the path. Recognition is the path. And recognition is not a decision you make. It's something that happens in you when you stop building walls against it. What that means practically, and I promised myself when I started this channel that I would always eventually get to the practical, is that the first work is simply to stop misidentifying what you are. Every time you locate your identity entirely inside the material architecture, inside your occupation, inside your social role, inside your body's needs and your relationships' definitions, and your culture's story about what a human being is, you are feeding the archonic system's primary mechanism, which is forgetting. Not dramatic forgetting, incremental forgetting, the kind that happens without drama, one small identification at a time, until one day you look up and can't remember the last time you felt the interior signal clearly. The marks matter because they're not just diagnosis, they're navigational. Every time you feel that interior signal, the frequency the second mark describes, that's not background noise to be managed. That's the pneuma giving you its location. That's Sophia's breath saying, still here. Still here, still here. Every time you feel the precognitive recognition, that tectonic thing that moves before your feelings arrive, that's your pneuma orienting towards something real. Don't argue it into submission with rationality. The demiurge built your rationality. It's a useful tool. It's not a compass. Every time you feel the directed loneliness, the gap between your interior life and the surrounding architecture, don't read it as evidence that something is wrong with you. Read it as evidence that your frequency is intact. The archons didn't get all of it. The forgetting isn't complete. There's still signal in there, clear and running, even when the noise is loud. And every time you feel the directional pull, the sense that you are supposed to understand something, that you are moving toward a particular order of knowing, follow it. Not recklessly, not at the expense of the life you're actually living, but don't dismiss it either. Don't train yourself to treat it as whimsy or spiritual self-indulgence. That pull is the pneuma orienting toward home. I want to close this section with something that happened to me recently, because it crystallizes what I'm trying to say better than another paragraph of explanation would. I was rereading the Trimorphic Protonoia, a text I've returned to many times and which never quite releases me. There's always something in it I hadn't seen the previous time, and I came across a passage where the divine voice speaks in first person and says, essentially, I am the one who dwells in the light. I am the one who moves in every creature. I am the life of my epinoia that dwells within every power and every eternal movement. And I read that passage and I didn't think it. I felt it land somewhere interior, somewhere below thinking, with a weight that was entirely disproportionate to what reading a sentence should produce. That's the marks being activated by contact with the text they were made to respond to. That's Sophia's breath recognizing its origin. You have that in you, all 7 marks. The question isn't whether you carry them, the question is whether you're ready to stop pretending you don't. So here's where we land, not at a conclusion, at a recognition. Sophia didn't embed these marks in you so you could spend a lifetime studying them from a respectful distance. She didn't breathe herself into the architecture of your interiority so you could admire the design and move on. The marks were placed there as activation points, contact surfaces, the places where the divine in you could be touched by the divine in the text, in another person, in a moment of inexplicable stillness at 2 in the morning when everything you thought you were falls quiet and something underneath starts to speak. You felt that. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't. I've said this before, and I'll say it plainly one more time. The 7 signs we've walked through in this video, the longing that never fully attaches to anything external, the sense of exile in spaces that should feel like home, the revulsion toward performance worship, the recurring pull towards something older and truer, the interior silence that arrives without being earned, the resonance that certain texts produce before the mind has time to evaluate them, and the knowing that lives below your certainty. These are not personality quirks. They are not spiritual affectations. They are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are Sophia's marks, and they are evidence of origin. Now, here's where it gets cosmically significant, and I mean that with full seriousness, not as a rhetorical flourish. The Gnostic tradition was nearly erased precisely because these marks were recognized. Not by the people who carried them, by the institutions that needed those people to not recognize them. Irenaeus didn't spend the energy he spent attacking these communities because their ideas were philosophically confused. He spent it because the ideas worked. Because people who understood themselves as carrying divine origin didn't stay in systems that required them to approach the divine as strangers and supplicants. That's not a theological problem. That's a structural one. You can't build a hierarchy between the divine and the human if the human keeps finding out they're the same thing. So the suppression wasn't of the texts. The suppression was of you, of the version of you that knows. And that version didn't disappear. It went into hiding, into the marks. Which is exactly why you're sitting with this now. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. And if there's one thing I want this channel to be, it's the place where the version of you that went into hiding finds something to recognize itself in. Not because I have answers you don't, but because the texts have them. Because the tradition that was nearly burned out of existence preserved something that was meant for exactly this moment in your interior life. I personally think that the most radical act available to anyone in this era isn't political and it isn't theological. It's the simple act of refusing to treat your own depth as suspicious, of refusing to pathologize the longing, explain away the exile feeling, perform comfort in rooms where you feel none. The marks are not a problem. They are the most honest thing about you. Stop managing them. Start reading them. Because here's the thing about Sophia's marks. They don't wait for you to be ready. They don't wait for you to have read enough, studied enough, resolved enough of your inherited confusion about what the divine is and where it lives. They were active before you open this video. They'll be active after. The only variable is whether you're paying attention. In my video on the monad call, the one where I documented a full year of nightly practice and what it actually changed, I described something toward the end that I want to return to here because it connects directly to this. I talked about the moment the call stopped feeling like a practice and started feeling like a description. Like I wasn't doing something. Like I was finally acknowledging something that had already been true. That's the marks completing a circuit. That's Sophia's breath finding the point of contact it was designed to find. You don't have to call it Sophia. You don't have to use any of the Gnostic vocabulary if it doesn't fit the shape of your interior experience. The vocabulary is a map. The territory is yours. But know what you're carrying. Know that the longing was never misdirected. Know that the exile was never a mistake. Know that the silence that opens in you sometimes, without warning, without cause, without anything to justify it, that silence is not empty. It is the most full thing you have ever touched. You carry Sophia's marks, all 7. You've always carried them. The only question left, and I'll let it sit with you, is whether you're ready to stop explaining them away and start living from them instead. If this video reached something in you, not just intellectually, but in that lower register, the one that knows before the mind does, then leave a comment that says, "I carry the marks." I want to know how many of you recognized yourselves in this, not out of curiosity, out of something that looks a lot more like urgency.